Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 165 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined as always by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Hello, Husker fans and college football fans.
Hello, everyone. We are here to talk about our favorite team, the Nebraska Cornhuskers, as well as the wider national world of college football. Today we'll be talking about the rivalry games, how everything played out, and what the conference championship games are going to be, as well as evaluating Nebraska's overall performance this season, and even a little bit of volleyball, since we are the number one team.
Sounds awesome, and lots to talk about on the football side for sure.
Yes. And I apologize if my voice is a little weird during this podcast. I'm still getting over that cold a little bit, but it's mostly gone now, so that's the good news.
You're on the mend.
Yes, on the mend. So we're going to go ahead and stick with our tradition and open up our cold beverages. I've got more of my Japanese Sapporo beer here.
Okay, and I'm drinking the Yingling Light, my beer of choice when I'm down here in Florida, trying to reverse the trend of what my traditional trend is, which is getting fatter as the year goes by, and then trying to recommit in January. Well, I'm trying to do that a little ahead of schedule this year. So here we go.
All right.
Cheers.
Cheers. Well, I'm glad to hear you're being health conscious this holiday season.
Well, yeah, it's hard to do.
It is. I had a great Thanksgiving dinner with your brother AJ and his wife Lynn this weekend. And then we had a great steak dinner at Outback Steakhouse. AJ said it was one of the top 5 steaks he's ever had. Wow.
That's pretty amazing coming from Outback Steakhouse. I mean, they make an okay steak, but I'll have to remind him of some of the steak he had when he was growing up.
All right. You do that.
I will.
So we'll be starting things out with, of course, Nebraska football. We played our last game of the year against Iowa. And we gave our predictions on the previous podcast. I was optimistic that we could pull out a W in a low-scoring game of 20-13, and you predicted a little bit higher scoring game of 28-12 with a Nebraska victory. But of course, it was a game with the lowest over/under point spread in many years, and we still managed to beat the under. It was a 10-13 victory for Iowa, so only 23 points overall. And unfortunately, Nebraska did not do what we said they needed to do on the previous podcast. It kind of was an Iowa-type game, very defensive, very field position based. And we had 3 turnovers, which, of course, are going to cost you against a team like Iowa. But once again, our defense put on a very impressive showing, being able to hold them in many situations. And we also blocked 2 field goals, which were critical for, keeping us in the game. But it came back to similar things we've had all year. Struggles on the offense to get drives going, turnovers, and as well some special teams mistakes, such as a missed field goal and a muffed kickoff. So it was one of those type of games.
And the bottom line is, going into the game, my hope was, I was looking through rose-colored glasses because I wanted so desperately for us to get to that 6-win mark and be able to have these extra 3 weeks of practice. I mean, that's the biggest disappointment of this. As much as I do not like Iowa and would have liked to have, ruined the end of their season a little bit and maybe led them into their, bowl game on a 2-game losing streak, because they're going to lose this weekend. But the bottom line is that, the mistakes that have plagued us throughout the season continue to not be resolved. And against a team like Iowa, whose whole structure as a team is based on basically playing field position, shortening the game, and waiting for you to make mistakes, and then taking advantage of those mistakes to win the football game. that strategy is a perfect strategy against Nebraska. And they're the best at it in the country, frankly. How a team that is as bad offensively as Iowa is can be 10-2 and going in to play the number 2 team in the country, Michigan, for the Big Ten championship is really something that should be studied.
Yeah, well, on the college football Reddit, that game got like 2,000, 3,000 upvotes, which is quite a lot. And so people are, fascinated at how Iowa has managed to kind of stumble their way into this Big Ten championship game.
Yeah. Well, it is really remarkable. And actually the game itself, if you just watch the game, it was entertaining because that game got so shortened so quickly. I mean, they had a drive, I think, that was it was in the second quarter, I think, and it was maybe 10 or 11 plays. They drove from like the 20-yard line to the 45-yard line of ours. I mean, it was literally like a 35-yard drive, but it took 11 plays and 6.5 minutes of clock time. I mean, it was just amazing.
Right. Well, and I actually couldn't watch the whole game because, like I said, I was with your brother this weekend, but pretty much the whole first half went by within the 90 minutes we had to watch the game.
We had 3 offensive possessions in the first half. 3.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at the stats for the game, we actually out-yarded them slightly. It was 264 yards to 257. And you look at their third down conversions, they were 6 of 18, which is obviously not great. Well, we were 8 of 17, so slightly better, but still not great.
Right.
But it really comes down to those turnovers, right? And Iowa had a turnover of their own, and it was at a crucial moment when they had the ball with just a few minutes left to go in the fourth quarter, and we were around midfield, and it was like, okay, we just need a couple first downs here, a few more yards, and we're in field goal range, and it was a tie ball game, 10-10, and we can win. And then, of course, we take a timeout, and we come out of that timeout, and Chubba Purdy throws a really bad interception right to an Iowa guy. And at that point, they had the field position for a field goal, and our defense gives up a first down, which gets them into a much easier range. And we don't manage to block this field goal, even though we'd blocked the previous 2. They brought in their backup kicker who got the game-winning field goal for them.
Yep. I mean, it's same story, 876th verse. So it's one of those things where, at the end of the day, you can go back through the whole season, and I'm sure we'll talk from a season perspective in future podcasts. But the bottom line is, if we had a quarterback, actually you need 2 or 3 that are real quarterbacks that have the skill sets to be a Division I quarterback. And that means all of them, not just some of them. And we have been, drawn into the devil in the details of these athletes who don't have all the quarterback skills. And we have lived with the bugaboo of high error quarterback play for not just this year, but literally 16 or 18 years. I guess it's probably 15 years right now that I could go back to and point, because we've had 3 quarterbacks in a row that played for 4 years for us, and were the primary quarterback for us for 4 years, 3 times, right?
Right.
The two Martinez's and Tommy Armstrong. Yes. There's 12 years right there of football play, all of whom are incredible athletes. Each one of them are individually incredible athletes, but they all had a fatal flaw, primarily in the area of decision making and turnovers.
Right. And, none of them being a true passing quarterback, right?
Correct.
But, of course, right, during the Taylor Martinez days, under Bo Pelini, we still managed to get to 9 wins, right? And thinking about this season overall, obviously we ended up 5-7. We are not going to a bowl game. We were 4th in the Big Ten East this year, or I'm sorry, the West. Which is an improvement over last year because we were 4-8 last year. So we did get one more win. I went back to one of our earlier podcasts that we did right before the Minnesota game, at the beginning of the football season, and we didn't really give a prediction for what our record would be per se, from what I could find. But we did basically say we hope that Matt Rule, A, we want to go to a bowl game, and B, we hope that Matt Rule is the secret sauce to help us avoid these close losses, right? Because under both Scott Frost and Mike Riley, we have a lot of close games, 7 points or less. So it feels like, we're so close. If we just could have reversed those, then we're a 9-win team, right? So we were hoping that Matt Rule would be the guy to do that. And I think we have to say, looking at the season overall, that Matt Rule failed on both counts. He did not get us to a bowl game, and we are still having the same bugaboo issue of losing the really close games and having lots of turnovers and things of that nature.
You are 100% right on all of those things. I think there's a lot of other things that we can look at, though, and say, hey, Matt Rule is moving us in the right direction. I think he is going to get us there. What he doesn't have yet, and what I just talked about, was a real quarterback. And I hope that he is got enough wisdom and experience now to know that he can say all the right things to support Chubba Purdy and Heinrich Harburg and Jeff Sims, if Jeff chooses to stay, to say, hey, these guys are still my quarterback room, and I believe that they can get better, and we're going to keep working hard every day to make them better quarterbacks. But I hope he's also wise enough that he needs to go out and get himself a player, preferably someone from the portal, who is going to come in with some experience, proven experience, as someone who can run a reasonable offense like what Coach Rule wants to run, and can throw the football and make the quick decisions that are necessary of a Power 5 quarterback. Because our problem has been none of these guys have ever been able to get comfortable in making those decisions. Now, part of that is our offensive line has been lousy during a big chunk of this time too, right? So one of the reasons is these people all have happy feet because they don't feel confident in their pocket. Right. So I know there's a lot to that, but
right. Well, and I would say one area, like you mentioned, there have been areas of improvement, which I'll get to in a moment. But one of them is that the offensive line was better than last year, because it felt like last year Casey Thompson was always on the run, facing a guy, whereas it was a little more like 50-50, right? Sometimes we did give him protection and time. And against, particular opponents, right, we were able to get a real running game going and things like that. But it was not consistent.
And we ran the football effectively and probably didn't run it enough. And that's where Nebraska fans were very critical of our play calling this year. And ultimately that falls on Coach Rule, because if Coach Satterfield wasn't calling games the way he wanted to, he could have influenced that game plan from week to week. And yet we would, talk the talk, but not walk the walk on commitment to the running game throughout the whole second half of the season. Ironically, the games we won in the middle of the season, we were heavy run because Harburg was healthy and was a load and was new, if you will, right, to the starting position. So there wasn't a lot of book on him. And he was able to pass just enough. And I thought, okay, he's figuring out the formula to win football games in the Big Ten West. And then we kind of went away from it in that we didn't stay patient and committed to the running game like we should have.
Right.
So those are all strategic decisions and things like that, in-game decisions, which is where I would be critical of Coach Rule. Right. The other stuff, the off-the-field stuff, the culture stuff, the recruiting stuff, the putting together the organization that he has, all that, I give him high grades.
Right. I did some comparative looking back at last season compared to this season, because of course that's what we're judging Rule on, is what happened last year, because it's a lot of the same players. And it's overall, quite similar. We had 3 Big Ten wins both seasons, and we kind of had 2 kind of more blowout losses, right? It was Oklahoma and Michigan last year, and then this year it was Michigan and Colorado. And then all the other games were close. But the biggest difference is that, right, last year we had that high-scoring loss to Georgia Southern. one of our non-conference opponents and a particularly embarrassing loss because we should not be losing to them. And Rule avoided that. We won both of our non-conference games solidly this year. So that's one feather in his cap. But when you're just looking at pure, win-loss record, that's really the only major difference between the two seasons.
Yep. No, I'm with you. And you know what? I think Coach Rule is honest enough with himself to recognize that, yep, you know what? And he gets back to that brass tacks pretty regularly. It says he acknowledges, I get it. We did not win enough this year. He knows that we should have won more. And the thing that's most frustrating to me about this season is that, if you had told me how putridly bad the rest of the Big Ten West was going to be, okay, and that our offensive line was going to perform the way it did, and our defense was going to perform the way it did, I would have told you we were going to win the Big Ten West, and we would have had 7 or 8 wins. And we certainly, back after we had our little 3-game, or won 3 out of 4 games sequence there, and we were looking at the next 4 games and saying, oh my gosh, we could easily go 2-2 here, and we're 7-5, right, instead of 5-7. And we didn't even go 2-2; we went 0-4, right? So you just can't do that, and that's on Rule that he wasn't able to find a win. Now you look at the scores: 3 points, overtime, 3 points.
Right. Well, so I actually did a little bit of math, adding up the scores from last year and this year and kind of comparing them, which obviously is not a perfect metric, right? Because, you might score a ton in one game and then get blown out the next game, right? And the margin of points for victory could be small. But I think it does show some overall trends. So I thought it was worth bringing up.
Okay.
So, for example, in 2022, our offense scored 271 points, while in 2023, we scored 216. So it was about a 20% drop in terms of total points scored by the offense. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, our defense gave up 331 points last year and only 219 this year. So it was a 34% increase in defense, which I think goes to show what we've seen this year, which is that Tony White and his 3-3-5 defense gave our Big Ten opponents a lot of trouble and was able to keep scores very low. Other than Colorado and Michigan, we kept all teams under 25 points this year. But our offense had even more struggles than last year. We had an injury, obviously, to our starting quarterback right in game 2, and then we had to bring in the third string quarterback, and we had I haven't looked at the turnovers, but we might have had even more than last year. So, when you add all that up, the offensive struggles kind of make some sense.
And you talk about all the injuries. I mean, the number of injuries we had this year to starters. Like, if you looked at our offense, literally to lose your top 2 running backs, basically to either injury or departure, your top 4 wide receivers, to lose 2 of your best offensive linemen for the season, to lose like 3 of your top flight defensive backs, the only place that didn't seem to lose a lot of players, ironically, was the defensive line, which is what I was most concerned about. And most of our defensive linemen made it through the season, without a season-ending injury. So we might have lost a guy for a game or a half here or there, but we stayed fairly healthy along the defensive line. And that was the area I was most concerned about going into the season, because I felt like we didn't have much depth there. And but I couldn't have imagined having to go to our 3rd and 4th team running backs, basically.
Yes, and to have lose so many so early in the season, right, and having to kind of scramble the rest of the season. But the good news is that we are quite a young team, and because of some of those injuries, a lot of those younger guys got a lot of playing time this season. So if we have guys get healthy over, the next year, and Rule has more time to implement his system and everything, and if we're able to hold on to Tony White as our defensive coordinator, obviously there's hope for improvement next year. But one of the challenges is that our schedule and the new Big Ten with, all the new teams added and everything is quite a bit harder than it was this year. So I have a feeling
Yes.
that we might be a better team next year, but maybe have the same record because the competition is just tougher.
I would agree with that. It's going to be much harder to get the 6 wins last year than it was this year. So our degree of improvement is going to have to be significant just to get over the hump and get to that 6th win, right? For us to be able to find 6 wins. The good news is if you look at our schedule, the early portion of the schedule is the easier part, if you will, for lack of a better term. And so there's a chance that we could get close early, but I have a feeling that next year's season arc is going to end up looking a lot like this year's, where we have some success early, winning 4 or 5 of our first 6 or 7 games, and then we end up losing a lot of games late.
Yes.
I'm fearful that that's the arc we're going to have next year. So we damn well better seize on the opportunity early in the season.
Yes.
But all of this is predicated on we need a quarterback. Right now, we do not have. I mean, we've now given all 3 of those guys multiple games as a starter where they've played entire games. And these aren't rookies, okay? None of these quarterbacks were freshmen. None of these quarterbacks were guys that hadn't seen football action before, right? So at the Division I, Big Ten level. So all of them have had the opportunity to play multiple games in Power 5 conference competition, and they've all proven that they are incomplete as quarterbacks. Okay. So we need a quarterback who's proven, and that can't be a freshman.
Yeah.
We need to go out and get ourselves somebody.
Yeah, very much so. On the recruiting note, we got a mix of news this week. We got a commitment just today from a 4-star offensive lineman named Grant Bricks, which obviously we need some help on the offensive line. So that's
absolutely
great.
He is a huge get, and somebody we were going after, and we were competing against. He's a Iowa kid, I believe, and so ironically, he had his final 3 had come down to Kansas State, Oklahoma, and Nebraska. Oklahoma appeared to be in the lead for a long period of time, but ultimately the relationships and what he believes in terms of the future of the program, he felt more comfortable at Nebraska, and so he's made the commitment to the University of Nebraska, which is awesome because we need offensive linemen.
Yes, we do. On the other hand, we had a 4-star defensive tackle who had already committed to us decommit this week. Not exactly clear what his reasons are, but there's got to be some good to go with the bad, I guess.
Well, yeah, and he had been aggressively pursued by Ohio State, but he didn't have a committable offer to them, meaning they were expressing interest in him. He's kind of their backup plan. If they lose some guys to the portal in that defensive line position, or if they lose out on some of their higher targets on the defensive line, then this guy is going to get a committable offer. And so they basically strung him out. They hit him hard and tried to recruit him hard and invited him to come to the school. Then they delayed his visit once they got him committed to coming to visit, even though he was already committed to Nebraska. They got him to say yes to a visit, and then they changed the date and pushed it beyond the early signing date, so that now he has to make a decision. If he wants to wait around for the possibility of an Ohio State commitment, he needed to delay Nebraska and say, Nebraska, I don't want to sign with you at the early signing date. And I think that probably led to a conversation where we parted ways.
Right. I mean, that makes sense. Ohio State kind of playing hardball there.
Right. Yep. Slow playing him, and we weren't willing to wait for him.
Right. Yep. So obviously in the upcoming offseason, we'll be talking more about, Nebraska's prospects for next year, evaluating Matt Rule and his staff, and, talking about how things will be better next year, right? The hope springs eternal, as they say.
Exactly. That is so true.
All right. But we do have another Nebraska team to talk about that did not do so badly this past week. That would be, of course, the women's volleyball team. They did have a major match against Wisconsin after the 5-set epic at Nebraska earlier this year. This one was going to be at Wisconsin, which we knew was going to be a challenge. And I think I predicted that they would beat us 3-2 in 5 sets, and you said they would beat us 3-1. Unfortunately, it ended up being 3-0. The first 2 sets were close. But we weren't quite able to, make our comebacks or hold on to the leads that we had. And then the third set, they kind of just went to town on us. We kind of, gave up a little bit.
Lost it. Yep. Well, and that's the thing. And regretfully, and that tends to happen to a team that's undefeated, right? That's never experienced defeat during the course of a season. Once they get close to being defeated, there's often a moment where they kind of lose their focus and collapse, for lack of a better term. And that definitely happened to us in that third set. The interesting thing is that we didn't necessarily play horribly in the first 2 sets. In fact, we had a lead in the latter part of each of those 2 sets, and then allowed them to just take the lead late and just overwhelm us in that what's called the red zone, between the score of 20 and 25 being the point where a normal game ends, right? The first 25 wins the set. They dominated in the red zone, and much like a team in the inside the 20-yard line in football. So the bottom line is also that they had a couple of players who just went off on us, and both of them exceptional players, both of them All-American level players, but they played above even their All-American level. Sarah Franklin, who is their outside hitter, played at a National Player of the Year level against us. She was hitting shots that, frankly, I haven't seen many collegiate players ever hit. She was hitting shots that would have been hard and just dime kills at the professional level. And then the 6'9" monster Anna Schreck was rested because she was coming off of injury, and motivated because we had beaten them in the earlier competition, and she was dominant. We had no answer for her height. She simply ignored our block and hit over the top of it. She can reach 11'4", and we have some girls who are very tall and can jump really well, and the best they're at is maybe 10'8", 10'9". So she's a full 6 inches above them, 7 inches above them in her vertical. Can you imagine that? I mean, I believe the net is 8.5 feet, the top of the volleyball net officially.
Right.
So if you're jumping to 11 feet, you're a little bit ahead of that net.
Yeah.
And it's just hard to stop that.
Yeah. So, regardless of what the score was, right, we both predicted that we would lose on the previous podcast, and that's what happened. Our first loss of the season. And then the girls had to go the very next day and play against Minnesota, who they'd beaten earlier in the season. And the first 2 sets were quite comfortable wins for us. Then in the third set, we had a nice lead and let them come back and win that one close, and then fought back in the fourth set to take it 3-1. So ending the regular season with just the one loss as the number 1 team in the country.
28-1. Yep. And, and overall, I think having that loss will probably turn out to be an okay thing for us, because going into the tournament, had we been undefeated, I would have worried more about the third game against Wisconsin that would have potentially be in our future, being a real problem for us. Now, I think that rebalances the playing field. And if we both take care of business and find ourselves the way that they set up the brackets, sets up that if Nebraska takes care of business and Wisconsin takes care of business, we're going to play each other for the national title. Now, there's a lot of ifs in there, but it's certainly set up for that. And if it does, I have a feeling we'll play better, and that our coaching staff will prepare better. And but I would still give Wisconsin the edge in that rematch, that third game. But I certainly wouldn't say we don't have any chance at all. I think we have a decent chance to beat them,
right?
If that's the case.
Well, it is a great story. If we beat them, at our home stadium, and then they beat us at their home stadium, and then we fight on a neutral field, a neutral
Yep.
court, I should say, for the championship. That would be pretty cool.
That would be.
We won't talk much about the overall tournament and the bracket. Obviously, they're going to be playing the first 2 rounds this weekend. But yes, we are on the side of the bracket with Kentucky and Florida and Arkansas are kind of the top teams in our side of things. So those are kind of the ones that we've got to worry about, and then potentially Pittsburgh or Louisville for the semifinal.
Right. And Kentucky is a great fear of mine. We've already played them this season, beat them 3-0 at home. I believe it was 3-0. It might have been 3-1. But Kentucky is playing at a way higher level than they were when they played us early in the season. So, my only fear would be our girls maybe not giving them the full respect and attention that they deserve, given that we're so young. I mean, that tends to be a habit of young people, is not, fully being invested in the idea that, hey, we need to focus on our side of the net and we need to just work hard to absolutely play our best every single point. I know our coaches are preaching that. That's the culture of our program. But the reality is young players still don't really get that, especially when they're having the level of success that we have, right? It can get easy to mail it in just a little bit every now and then, every here and there, which is why we've had this tendency to have a third set where we put our foot off the gas and let a team back in and then end up having to win in 4. Now we've had the fortitude and the never give up to come back and win each time, but that isn't going to work in this tournament. So Nebraska needs to mature in that process. But we have a tough bracket, but frankly, it's not dramatically tougher than any other one. I would say that Pittsburgh probably has one of the tougher brackets, just because they have to play Louisville again for the third time. And overall, the whole tournament was interestingly organized, obviously driven by RPI and by regionalization, so that they were minimizing travel. Like, all the Big Ten teams are playing in the Wisconsin bracket except for us, and all the SEC teams were sent to our bracket, except for a couple of them. I mean, we got like 4 of the 8 SEC schools that got in are all in our bracket. Yes. So they really regionalized things.
Yep. So obviously, yeah, we'll be talking about that on future podcasts, especially if they go all the way to the finals. We'll definitely make that a real focus.
Yep.
Now transitioning back to the national side of college football. Well, obviously we talk about the games, but before that, we want to do a quick bit on the coaching carousel, which is, of course, always spinning very fast at this point in the season. So Mississippi State, who had fired their coach previously, hired Oklahoma offensive coordinator Jeff Lebby to lead their program. And also Fran Brown, who was Georgia's defensive backs coach, is going to Syracuse, which is a bit of a nice thing for Nebraska fans, because we were worried about Tony White potentially going there.
That is true. That is nice to see that position filled.
Yes. And then both Houston and Indiana fired their coaches, so they'll both be looking here in the coming weeks. And then we had the big ones, which was Michigan State hiring Jonathan Smith, who is Oregon State's current coach. So they're filling that role well. And from the reactions I saw online, everybody seemed to be saying that's a great get for Michigan State. Oregon State had a very good year this year by their usual standards. And this guy seems to be one of the big reasons.
Yeah, I think he's highly respected. Interesting, because they have previously had a coach named John L. Smith at Michigan State. So this is the second John Smith to be the head coach in the last 20, 25 years, I would say, at the school. Totally unrelated, of course, but just an interesting little snippet.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, he took an Oregon State program, which, our former coach Riley had coached at for many years. It's a tough place to recruit to. They very seldom had any success there for, the history of their program. And this guy got them, to where they were extremely competitive in a competitive league of the Pac-12 for the last 2 to 3 years. So he gets a lot of credit for being able to do that.
Mm-hmm. And then Texas A&M, who of course had the high-profile firing of Jimbo Fisher, had to fill their spot, and they ended up getting Mike Elko from Duke. Obviously, kind of a similar story to Oregon State, right? Duke's had a great year this year. I know you're kind of a fan of that particular team, and they kind of got off to a great start, and then kind of stumbled, in the midpoint of the season a bit, so they didn't go quite as good as they could have. But they played a lot of close games against some very good teams.
Right. Well, and again, as we've talked many times, we talked a lot about it with Nebraska. They had an injury at the quarterback position, and like a lot of schools, a lot of coaches or teams rather, you don't have three great quarterbacks sitting there in only the premier teams, the Michigans, the Ohio States, the Georgias, the Alabamas, the Texases. They have 2 and 3 deep of future NFL star type players at the quarterback position. Most other schools don't have that luxury, especially now in the age of NIL. It's going to be extremely hard to keep that kind of talent around. Never again will teams have a roster like Nebraska did back in its heyday, where we could lose a Tommy Frazier for the year and have a Brooke Behringer come in and not miss a beat. Right. So that's just not going to be a typical situation. And Duke was caught in that. They lost their premier quarterback, and the next guy came in. He was good, but just wasn't that guy. So their performance was negatively affected. And it's probably part of why Mike Elko, you can't say no to the kind of money and the environment that you can get, the resource, everything at Texas A&M, which will be like no place he's ever been.
Very much so. Our next topic is, of course, going to be the games from the past week of college football, week 13, the rivalry week, which is always a fun one. And I think this year in particular went to show that, even when the teams are mismatched, in terms of their record and their overall perception and everything, those rivalries and, those the X factors, right? The things that you can't quite predict, tend to rear their heads and still make the games very close and exciting, because there was a lot of that this weekend.
Yes.
But we'll start with the biggest game, which of course we gave a prediction for, which was Michigan versus Ohio State. You predicted that Michigan would win 31-21. Well, I sided with Ohio State and said they would get their revenge 35-28. But the final score ended up being 30-24 to Michigan, so pretty close to the points that we were thinking it would be. But it goes to you in terms of the overall result. And I got to watch part of that game live. And OSU actually was driving late, so they had a chance because they were only down by 7, right? So they had a chance to...
Yeah.
Or
I think it was 6.
Yes, correct. 6. So they actually had a chance to win the game by 1, potentially.
Yes.
With a 4th down drive. But of course they threw a pick on that drive, which of course ended the game. Michigan's defense, I would say, gets a lot of credit for that win, being able to slow them down for the vast majority of that game.
Well, and I would also credit Ohio State's play calling / coordinator, who happens to be Ryan Day. Their head coach is also their play caller, because they came out in the second half, had a drive in which it was like probably an 11-play drive, and I think 9 of the plays were running plays, and they drove it right down Michigan's throat, and they probably averaged 6 or 7 yards a carry on the running plays. I think they did throw it once or twice for short little gains, when the circumstance required it. But it was a beautiful, beautiful drive, committed to the running game. And when I saw that drive, I thought, you know what? Michigan might be in trouble, because there was clear dominance at the line of scrimmage by the Ohio State offensive line. And then they never went back to it. They never called another series like that the whole rest of the second half.
Yes.
Now, there were circumstances, Michigan immediately responded and took the next drive and drove down and scored again. And apparently that made him think, oh, I need to score more. This is going to be a score fest in the second half. And so he started throwing it more. And he has a good, not great quarterback at this point. That kid might become a great quarterback, but he isn't today at Ohio State. And so they put the game in his hands instead of saying, you know what, I'm going to challenge my offensive line and we're going to get down and dirty and go old school Big Ten football and just grind it out. And I think if they had done that, they probably beat Michigan.
Right. I mean, when it came down to just 6 points, right? Because Michigan had to settle for 2 field goals, I believe, later in the game.
Yeah, and Michigan was pulling out all the stops. They were doing reverse passes, and I mean, they weren't showing patience either. They just made fewer mistakes with their lack of patience.
There you go. Which, of course, this now brings up a whole discussion amongst national pundits and Ohio State fans about Ryan Day, who has lost 3 times in a row now to Michigan, and Ohio State enjoyed a very comfortable lead in that rivalry in the past decade or so.
2 decades.
2 decades, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a kind of a new feeling for Ohio State fans to be on the other side of that coin. And even though he has done great there by all accounts, right? I think he's only lost like 6 games or something like that.
Yeah, he's lost 6 games, 3 in the Big Ten.
Right.
All 3 to Michigan.
Exactly. So, it's one of those situations where you do well, you beat almost everyone you play, but you lose the rivalry game, right? And there's nothing Ohio State fans hate more than losing to Michigan. So there are some, kind of more radical fans who are like calling for his head and everything. But I don't see any world where that happens.
No, absolutely not. And especially right now, because Gene Smith is still the athletic director there. Now, with a new athletic director, does he get influenced by, powerful boosters and things like that as he settles into his job there? That could change the perspective a little bit. But again, if that guy has a brain and can look beyond the passion, right? I mean, at some point there is an expectation that you have to compete with your rival. But frankly, other than the one time 2 years ago when Michigan kind of took them to the woodshed a little bit, these last 2 seasons, those have been very winnable games for Ohio State. Ohio State was absolutely right with Michigan in those 2 years. And so you just have to recognize that the other team has talent too. The other team has good coaches too, right? And if you're in a rivalry of that level, you're going to lose some and you're going to win some. Hell, if you're close to 50-50, that's probably about where it should be. That's the gravitating to the mean, right?
Right. Exactly. All right. So then the next game that we gave a prediction for on the previous podcast was Oregon versus Oregon State, because Oregon State was ranked pretty highly. I predicted that Oregon would win in a closer one, 28-21, while you predicted higher scoring 42-24 victory for Oregon. And the final score ended up being 31-7. So not as high scoring as you predicted, but a wide margin. Oregon totally dominated that one.
Yes, which is kind of what I thought. So that one played out basically the way I thought it would. Obviously, Oregon didn't score quite as many points, but they were dominant, and Oregon State struggled to score.
Yes. And this was an interesting one, Georgia versus Georgia Tech, a Georgia Tech team who's middle of the road, not that great this year, going up against the number 1 team in the country. And it ended up being a pretty close one. Georgia pulled it out 31-23. But Georgia had 2 turnovers, including one early, which led to an early score by Georgia Tech. But Georgia Tech did have to settle for a lot of field goals because of Georgia's great defense, which cost them some scoring opportunities, and they missed a field goal as well. So Georgia made some mistakes, but managed to kind of rectify the situation by the end.
Right, exactly, and but it does show that this Georgia team isn't quite the juggernaut, right, that some former teams have been in recent years, where Georgia was just almost, a shoulder above most other teams, right? Even last year's team, although you could argue, Ohio State was a play away from beating Georgia in the semifinals last year.
Yes.
But there's big gap between Ohio State's talent and Georgia Tech's talent. That's a game that Georgia probably mailed in a little bit and didn't quite have the level of focus that they're going to need this week.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, we had a similar situation with Washington versus Washington State in the Pac-12, another one of the top 4 teams playing. And Washington State actually was down 2-1 on the turnover margin, so they turned it over one time more than Washington did, but they were actually winning for quite a bit of that game. And it came down to I believe it was 4th down and 1 late in the game with just a little bit of time left to go. And the Washington head coach called that's right, because they were on their own 25-yard line, and it was a tie ball game. I want to say it was 21-21. So basically, if you go for it on 4th down, at your own 25 and you don't get it, you're giving Washington State a free field goal, to potentially win the game.
Win the game, right.
Yeah, and they went for like this, trick play, kind of like a reverse, toss it back to the left side, and it went for quite a few yards. So I have to give the Washington head coach some credit for some big balls, because that was a risky thing to do, and it paid off big for him, and they kicked a field goal and won the game.
Yeah, but you know what? I still disagree with that call. But that coach has a history of doing that, right? Like he has been a gunslinger. He goes for it on 4th down. The Oregon coach is the same way. They both play very aggressively. They kind of ignore convention and are much more willing to take those risks and believe in the talent of their team just being better than the other team's talent. But in that case, doing a trick play like that, there's so many things that can go wrong on a trick play. Do you really want to have your whole season in terms of your goals disrupted because as a coach you get flippant and throw a fluky, special play? I don't know. I just think that's a bad and it screams, I don't have confidence that my team can just do it in the traditional sense, right? With a traditional run or a traditional pass play that we have confidence in, that we execute every day in practice, 100 times, right? A week or something. So I don't love that, but I get it. It worked. So he's going to get praised.
Yep. Well, it was one of those, you're either an idiot or you're a genius. And this time he was a genius. So.
I look beyond the result of the play and say he's an idiot anyway.
All right. Well, fair enough. And then we had a similar situation with Florida State playing against Florida. It was a home game for Florida, and Florida State won, but it was 24-15. And Florida actually led for the majority of that game. Right. It was 12-0 at halftime, with Florida, I believe, getting a safety on Florida State. But they made a lot of mistakes, with penalties. They had 2 of their players ejected over the course of the game. And so they kind of let Florida State get back into it in the second half.
Yep. But the thing is that Florida is a good, not great football team this year, and has some flaws. So the fact that Florida State struggled so much in a rivalry game against a Florida team that they should have been able to handle is a red flag to me about Florida State and where they're really at, and just how much they're missing the quarterback that they've lost for the season.
Yes, that definitely is a major blow to them.
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and talk about this one. Kentucky versus Louisville, which Louisville was ranked as the 10th team in the 10th best team, and ended up going Kentucky's way, who's kind of a like 7-5 type team in the SEC, 38-31. Right. It was at home for Louisville, and they turned the ball over 3 times compared to Kentucky's 1, and gave up a kickoff touchdown. They kind of played down to their opponent.
Well, they choked is what they did. That's a team, Louisville, that is the come out of nowhere Cinderella story for the season, and they acted like it in this game. You're playing your in-state rival, a team that regularly beats you because they're the state school, right? They're the big SEC monster, and you finally have a team that appears to be playing at a higher level, and then you go and lay an egg when you play them. That's just a big brother, little brother psyche thing, right? And disappointing because Louisville still, because that was a non-conference game, much like the Florida State-Florida game. Those are just in-state rivalries, but not conference games. So Louisville's going to be playing Florida State this weekend, and both of them are coming off. One's coming off of a loss, and the other one's coming off of a game they can't be happy about how they played.
Yep, very true. Well, and another team who's in a similar situation is Oklahoma State. They'll be playing against Texas in the Big 12 championship this weekend. But they had a very close one with BYU and went into double overtime. But Oklahoma State managed to win at home 40-34. BYU is actually up 24-6 at halftime. But Oklahoma State, I believe, BYU got a pick six, which helped them get to that lead. But Oklahoma State started to make the comeback in the second half. Actually had the final PAT was blocked, which helped lead to the tie game that led to the overtime, because I think they would have had a 4-point lead, but because of the blocked PAT, they only had a 3-point lead, and so they were going to kick a field goal and go into overtime. And it was a rainy game, so things always get crazy when the weather's out there like that.
Yes.
So they had to drive for a field goal in the last 50 seconds of the game. And it actually ended in the second overtime. BYU was, doing a run play, and Oklahoma State's guy ripped the ball out of his hands and managed to get the turnover, which of course ends the game right there. So BYU didn't really get a proper chance to respond to Oklahoma State's earlier touchdown.
Right. Interesting. I didn't watch that game, so did not have that detail. So it sets up some interesting conference championship games. I'm not going to say this is like one of those years where you're just like, wow, this is going to be an incredible, big time game after big time game after big time game. I don't feel that way as much about the conference championship games this year.
For one, I would recommend you watch the highlights of that BYU game, because it was quite fun to watch. But the craziest one we're saving for last, which is of course the Iron Bowl, Auburn versus Alabama. Auburn coming off of an embarrassing, historically bad loss, right, to New Mexico State the previous week. So we both thought in last podcast, there's no way they're going to challenge Alabama. But the Iron Bowl finds a way to make things crazy. It was at home for Auburn, and they were actually in the lead and managed to bounce back after that bad loss and played a very good game. Not really a lot of turnovers in the game. But of course it all comes down to this crazy sequence at the end where they have Alabama at 3rd and 20 and, kind of at the, I don't know what that would be, like the 30, 40 yard line. And they give it up, after, stopping them obviously and sacking them and stuff. And then Alabama gets down to the goal line and has a snap go wrong and gets into a 4th and 30 situation, which, should be impossible. 4th and 30 to the goal line. So their only choice is to get a touchdown, because that's what they needed at that point to win the game. A field goal didn't do them any good. It was late in the game. And somehow Auburn gives up this pass into the corner of the end zone. Alabama scores. And they get known for one of the greatest choke jobs of all time in college football.
Yeah. Well, and there was another weird play in that sequence, and I don't know. I think it was after the missed snap that went backwards. Then Alabama's quarterback overran the line of scrimmage.
Yes.
Then tried to run back behind the line of scrimmage and throw the ball down the field. And he completes the pass, I believe, but gets called for, of course, going over the line, which is against the rules.
So I watched the highlights. He did go over the line, but it was an incomplete pass.
It was an incomplete pass,
yes.
But he still got called for throwing the ball. It was still a penalty, which moved him back.
And you get the loss of down.
And you get the loss of down, exactly, which put him into the 4th and 30 or whatever. So it was the bad snap combined with, so you've already got a quarterback who should be rattled because he just made a huge blunder in a critical situation, right? So you can't be going back into the next play, with full confidence because you just made a huge mental blunder.
Right.
And then the fourth down happens.
Yes. Well, and on that third down, it's 3rd down and forever. And Auburn, only had like 3 guys at the line, right? They just went full
Right.
prevent, and it
Yeah.
worked, right? The pass
Yep.
wasn't completed, so they did the same thing basically the next play, and the guy
Right.
had forever. Milrow had
Yes.
forever to throw that ball, and he
Yes.
managed to find one guy open in
And
the corner.
corner. Yep. Yep. And that guy made a great catch.
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't actually a really great catch. Um, and you can't expect those defensive backs, no matter how good they are, to cover for that long. That's why the prevent is just a horrible idea. I don't buy it. I would argue that it is never a good idea, and that you should play your defense. And if they want to come out in some 5 wide thing, then you have to spread out and cover those wide receivers, but you don't do it in a prevent. You just don't. You go ahead and challenge them, and more often than not, if you can, you blitz somebody so that that guy's not going to have all day. You make that quarterback uncomfortable.
Yes.
In this day and age where every one of these quarterbacks plays in 7-7 leagues all summer long, right? Where they're playing without a rush, they're great. All these quarterbacks, even our quarterbacks, even Nebraska's sucky quarterbacks who throw interceptions every faster than lightning, even they would look good in 7-7 because that's what they do all summer. So you've got to put pressure. You've got to have a man in their face, because if you're going to let them basically play 7-7 where they don't have any rush, then they're going to pick you apart.
Yeah.
Period.
Very true. So that sets the stage for our conference championship games coming up this weekend. We've got Oregon versus Washington in the Pac-12, Oklahoma State versus Texas in the Big 12, Georgia versus Alabama in the SEC, Michigan versus Iowa in the Big 10, and Louisville versus Florida State in the ACC. And just today, the college football playoff rankings were released. Nothing too crazy, but Georgia remained at number 1, with Michigan now rising to number 2 because of the Ohio State victory, with Washington 3 and Florida State 4. So all the undefeated teams, of course, still at the top. And you've got Oregon right behind there at number 5. And from what I saw, even though Washington is undefeated and won against Oregon previously, as you recall, it was a very narrow victory, and Oregon is actually favored by the bookies in this rematch that's coming up here. They've kind of been trending better, whereas Washington's had a lot of close games recently. So do you think it will go?
It is at Washington, though, because the Pac-12 plays at the home stadium. Right. It's I think that is true. I can double check that, but the Big Ten, of course, they play in Indianapolis. They play at a big stadium. So does the SEC. They play in Atlanta every year. I mean, all these other conferences play usually in a big semi-neutral site, stadium. A lot of times an NFL stadium, but I don't believe that's the case in the Pac-12. I think they play at home. So just an FYI. But here's the thing that I find interesting, since you were just talking about the standings. The one thing I would argue with the committee on is Ohio State dropped to 6th. I believe they were 2nd. So they dropped 4.
Yes.
Okay. Why is Oregon ahead of them? Ohio State's lost 1 game to the number 2 team, Michigan, at their home stadium, in a game in which they could have, as you said, won. They were only down 6. They could have won with 1 play. Oregon has lost to Washington, also a highly regarded team, right? But number 3. So how is it, that Oregon is placed ahead of Ohio State when Ohio State was ahead of them before? And the only argument I guess you could make is Oregon probably has more top 25 wins, because early in the season, the Pac-12 looked great because of their non-conference, and there was a bunch of ranked teams in the Pac-12, right? Arizona was ranked, Arizona State was ranked, Washington State was ranked, Oregon, all these teams, right? So I guess that's the argument for why Oregon finds themselves ahead of that. And Oregon is in the championship game this weekend, where Ohio State is not.
Right. I would say all those are factors. Then I'm also looking right now, and they did play Texas Tech in their non-conference, so they played a good team in their non-conference as well.
Yeah.
Also, just to
Well, Ohio State played Notre Dame.
Well, that's true. To correct you, it's actually happening at Allegiant Stadium in Nevada, so it is not a home game for Washington.
Oh, it is not. Okay, that changes things. Then that's probably why Oregon is the favorite.
Okay, there you go. So yeah, in terms of the conference championship games, the Pac-12 and the SEC are kind of easy ones, right? Where both teams are coming in very highly regarded. Oregon, Washington, Georgia, Alabama. So it's just kind of like whoever wins that game is definitely in the top 4, right, for the playoff.
I don't know about Alabama though; they're 8.
Well, sure, but if they win,
go through the scenarios. But if let's say they beat Georgia, right? Then, but Michigan wins. The other 3, Michigan, Washington, and whoever else wins, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. And then Texas beats Oklahoma State, and Texas beat Alabama, and they're both 1-loss teams.
Right. Which that does get tricky, right? Because Texas is Alabama's 1 loss.
How do you choose Alabama over Texas?
That's true. Okay. Well, so I hadn't thought of that. I guess I was more going on the fact of, those two, the Pac-12 and the SEC are like matchups of like both teams being ranked in the top 10, whereas the others have some more wild outcomes if the...
I totally agree. You got Michigan playing Iowa. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. No, I get it. I get it. And Florida playing Louisville.
Right.
I mean, Florida State, rather.
Right. Even if Iowa or Louisville won, right, they wouldn't be in the top 4. That's where an Ohio State or someone else could sneak in there.
Or an Oklahoma State beating the Texas, who's 19th. Oklahoma State's ranked 19th. So.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think you do bring up a good point there. If it played out like you said, so all the expected teams won,
except Georgia,
and then it was Alabama versus Texas, because Texas's 1 loss is to Oklahoma, right? Who is also well regarded. Right, it was a close game,
and it was a very close game in a neutral field. Yeah.
Right. I mean, Oklahoma is 12th, right? So they're 10-2 currently. But like you say, right, it would feel weird. Head-to-head. Right, it would feel weird to have the team that won the head-to-head lose in the tiebreaker, basically.
Right.
So you're right. I think that would be a scenario where Alabama would be left out even as the SEC champ.
Right. Right.
Yeah, which would be very interesting.
Very interesting.
But yeah, like you say, Michigan versus Iowa, considering that Nebraska should have beaten Iowa this past week, and how good Michigan is, I think Michigan should be able to handle that one pretty good. And then Louisville, Florida State, like you say, is interesting because they both struggled recently. But you'd like to think that that close call with Florida kind of woke Florida State up. Though you did mention previously that the committee does take into account injuries when they consider the top 4 teams, and the fact that Florida State has lost their quarterback that got them this far in the season, and then perhaps they win against Louisville, but it's a very ugly game, and they barely win by like 3 points. That could end up being a factor, I think.
It could be, especially depending on how the other games go. But as I look at this, we're going to go through those, right? We're going to go through and pick those games now.
Sure thing. So, let's start with Michigan and Iowa then.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and say that Michigan wins, and they manage to, Iowa's defense obviously is very good, so I think they will slow Michigan down, but in the end, Iowa's offense just won't be able to do much. So Michigan will end up winning 31-10 over Iowa.
It's a good score. I would agree with that. I think Michigan's going to win it. There's an awful lot of motivation, I think, on Michigan's part to dominate this game, to just win it going away. And recall that the only other time that Iowa played a team with an offensive pulse, because there really wasn't a team in the West that had any semblance of successful offensive play, was Penn State, and Penn State beat them like 31-3. Okay, so your score's pretty much right on cue there. I do believe that Iowa's strategy is going to be the strategy they use every week, which is we're going to muddy up this game. We're going to do time of possession things. We're going to just try to eke out first downs. We're going to use our All-American punter in a dome stadium to keep us in the game and to flip the field and make Michigan's efforts tough, right? And their defense is good enough that maybe they could challenge Michigan's great offensive line, who lost, by the way, their leader, their best player, if you will, their most experienced lineman went down to injury in the Michigan Ohio State game. So he is going to be unavailable. He was carted off in a cart. So I'm fairly certain he's not going to be playing this week. So the question becomes, can Iowa's traditional game plan work? And I think it's going to a certain extent, but then at some point Michigan's going to break it open. And so I think it's a big day for Michigan's running backs, and I think they end up winning like 35-9.
All right, a lot of field goals in there.
Yeah.
And to correct you, actually, against Penn State, they lost 31-0. So their offense got no points.
Yeah, no points. Which I'm giving them a ton of credit to score 9 on this Michigan defense. Yeah. I really am. I'm assuming that they're going to get a turnover, but then they'll end up having to kick a field goal. They won't get a touchdown out of it, But I think it's going to be a comfortable victory for Michigan.
Yep. All right. Well, and the next one we'll talk about is the SEC, Georgia versus Alabama. Of course, we thought that this might be a rough year for Nick Saban at the beginning with the early loss to Texas, right? They were looking a little bit lost with their young quarterback, but he's, kind of stepped up his game, and they managed to get through undefeated, even though they did not look great against Auburn. They made it all the way here. It is in Georgia, the game.
Well, Atlanta.
Right. Yeah. So you would think that gives Georgia a bit of a home field advantage, even though it's not their stadium. But of course, Nick Saban is going to be coming for revenge, right? Because he's lost to Kirby Smart now a few times in recent years. But the question is, can they pull it off? Both teams kind of struggled last week, so they're both going to be coming in probably more focused and trying to play a cleaner game. So what's your prediction?
I have to admit, I have just not watched enough Georgia football this year. I should have been watching them more, knowing they were going to be one of the best teams in the country. But I guess it just has to do with when Nebraska was playing and how pissed I was after Nebraska lost. Maybe I didn't watch the Georgia game at night or whatever. But I think Georgia's the better team this year. I do. Although Alabama's quarterback, kind of a dual threat guy, he could make some things interesting. But I was amazed at how Auburn was able to move the football against Alabama. This wasn't some fluke where Alabama was dropping turnovers, and that's why Auburn was able to hang in there, even though Auburn's not very good. So I'm inclined to go with Georgia here, and I think Georgia wins by about 10 points. So I'm going to say 31-21, Georgia.
I just went and scrolled through their Georgia's record this year, their various wins. And actually, when they played against Auburn earlier in the year, they won, but it was pretty narrow, 27-20. They also had a close game against Missouri, right, who was a top 10 type team this year.
I remember that.
Yeah. So those have kind of been, and then Georgia Tech, right? So those have kind of been their close games. They've done quite well against pretty much everybody else on their schedule.
Right.
So between that and the location of the game and everything, I'm inclined to agree with you that Georgia wins, but I'm going to say it's going to be closer, maybe a little higher scoring. So I'll say Georgia wins 42-31 against Alabama.
Okay. You might be right.
Actually,
Yeah, I like your score.
we'll say 34 Alabama. Make it a little bit closer.
Oh, okay. You're going to add one more field goal. I
Yes.
like your score. I do. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. But I have a feeling that they're both going to be feeling each other out. So there's not going to be a lot of scoring early, right? And then eventually it'll get into one of these pinball things late in the game when both teams have figured the other team's offensive game plans out.
Yeah. And then in the Big 12, we've got Texas versus Oklahoma State. Kind of a weird one where everybody was expecting that Oklahoma would be getting their rematch with Texas in the championship game. But because Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma, right, in their matchup,
right?
I think Oklahoma State won the tiebreaker and is now kind of unexpectedly in the championship game. But do you think they've got a shot?
No. I think Texas wins. And I actually think this might be a little bit of a blowout. It's going to be high scoring, I believe, but I still think it'll be like 20-17. Let's do 17-point victory. So I'm going to say Texas scores 48, and minus 17 would be 31, right?
That's true. I mean, that BYU game was high scoring, but that's partially because it went at a double overtime, so you got some extra points in there.
Correct.
Oklahoma State did not play Texas in the regular season, so this is the first time these two are meeting up. Once again, it is in Texas, this game.
At the Jerry Dome.
Right, so you have to say a bit of a home field advantage for Texas.
That's huge.
Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah, of course, Texas getting all the advantages, as we know.
Yep.
So yeah, I think I'm going to agree that Texas wins. Similarly, though, I think I'll go maybe a little bit closer because we didn't mention it. Texas played against Texas Tech in their rivalry game, and they won that pretty soundly. But Texas Tech is, pretty mediocre this year, so not exactly sure what to take from that. But I'm going to say that Texas. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, well, Texas just has so much more talent, right? I mean, Texas Tech isn't even in the same stratosphere in terms of the talent on the roster. So that dictates that a little bit. And Texas has some good quarterbacks, right? They're one of the few schools that we talked about earlier that actually has depth at the quarterback position.
Right. So I'm going to go ahead and say they win 38-31.
Okay. It just occurs to me, I'm going to predict something right now about the SEC, and maybe this has already been announced, and I'm way late because I haven't been paying attention to the news. But I'm going to predict right now that the SEC is going to change its tradition of having its conference championship game at the Georgia Dome in Atlanta, and they're going to start rotating it between the Jerry Dome and the Georgia Dome every other year. As part of the new SEC, and giving the gift that always seems to go Texas's way.
You might be right. Well, and frankly, now that Georgia's emerged, as kind of a real force in the SEC, right? They've won it the past few years. Maybe they're also thinking, just change it up so it's not always a Georgia advantage or whatever.
Right.
All right, and then we've got Louisville FSU in the ACC. I'll admit this is probably the one I know the least about because I haven't really followed either team too closely. But given that Louisville just lost to Kentucky, I got to believe that FSU should be able to take this one even with their backup quarterback. So I'm going to go ahead and say that FSU wins. And let's say that the score is 30 FSU to 20 for Louisville.
30-20. Okay. Well, I'm going to spice it up. I'm going to say Louisville's pulling the upset here.
Ooh.
I'm going to say Louisville's going to win, and they're going to score 42 points, and Florida State's going to score 28 points.
Wow.
42-28 Louisville.
Quite a significant victory.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. And then we'll talk about Oregon, Washington. We've been kind of looking forward to this one because the last game between these two was a very fun one to watch. So we're hoping for
Yeah.
another exciting rematch. Now we establish it is at a neutral field in Nevada, so no real advantage either way. Um, and even though Oregon kind of has been playing better recently, and Washington's had some close calls, and Oregon, frankly, should have won the previous game, if they just did a couple things differently. I think I'm still going to side with Washington. They're kind of reminding me of TCU this year in that they've come close to losing a lot, but they've managed to pull it out. They're a bit scrappy in that way. And obviously, they have some sort of mental edge, you could say, because they did win last time. So whether that advantages the team that got beat, and they want revenge, or whether it advantages the team that won, it can kind of go either way, but I'm going to say it swings Washington's way, and they win in a pretty high scoring affair. So let's say it's a 42-38 Washington victory.
And I'll switch that and say it's an Oregon victory. Same score as you, but Oregon wins.
There we go. Okay, so we got a couple differences in the where our champions are going to be.
Yes. Which would then play out then, right? If what we predict, well, since we didn't predict the same thing, the four teams in my scenario are going to be Oregon, Michigan and Georgia both win. So 1 and 2 stay the same. But then Washington, number 3, gets beat by Oregon. So Oregon takes their place there. And then the 4th spot, Florida State gets beat by Louisville. So that opens the door for Ohio State.
Correct. In that scenario, because Ohio State is ranked 6th, and then behind them is Texas and Alabama. But in this scenario,
now if Texas beats Oklahoma State, Texas jumps over. I'm wrong about that. Texas would jump over
Ohio
State, and Texas ends up being the 4th team. That's what it ends up being.
Correct.
So in my scenario, your scenario would be Washington wins, so there's 3. So and then you say Florida State wins. So you're saying they stay the same, and then the question becomes: does a Texas victory push them over Florida State?
Right.
Would they actually rearrange that? And I just don't know that the committee would do that if both Florida State and Texas won, unless Texas won in an absolute blowout and Florida State won in a sloppy game in which they really didn't deserve to win, but just kind of fell into it like Alabama.
Yes, I would say that would probably be the only scenario where it would be close.
Where they,
and
boy, that would be awesome for Texas to not be able to go. So I almost want to switch my. I want Florida State to win now because I would love it if they could keep Texas out.
There you go. Well, yeah, you were thinking of a scenario where you would get 2 Big Ten teams in, but now you're like, oh no, I've opened the door to Texas. What have I done?
Exactly. No, what have I done? Exactly.
So yeah, it'll be interesting. I could see like Washington becoming number 2 over Michigan, right? If they beat an Oregon team that's ranked 5th, while Michigan beats an Iowa team that's ranked 16th, right? I don't think the committee would value that as much. But it doesn't really matter because either way they play each other. And then Florida State gets paired up against Georgia. So, we'll see how it all plays out next week.
That's right. Well, like I said, it's a good slate. It's not as exciting a slate. I'm obviously going to be very interested in that Alabama-Georgia game. That Washington-Oregon game looks like it will be intriguing. I will be interested in the Oklahoma State-Texas game just because I very much will be an Oklahoma State fan on Saturday. And then, I'm intrigued by the Louisville-Florida State matchup. I think obviously Florida State's the better team, but given their instability at quarterback, Louisville and I'm kind of an admirer of Louisville's coach who used to be Purdue's coach, and so I have a feeling Louisville will play well.
Yes. I will say, as we were mentioning, how Iowa stumbled into this position in their season, it would be a hilarious capstone if they somehow managed to beat Michigan, the number 2 team in the country, and be the Big Ten champions this year. That would be the ultimate, troll of college football.
It would, and of Michigan and of everyone who downplays Iowa's and laughed at Iowa's putrid offense that was one of the worst in NCAA history all season. And it would be quite comical, actually.
Yes. So there are some scenarios where, chaos happens and we get Ohio State getting in, or potentially, maybe a one-loss Georgia, right? If they lose to Alabama in a close one, and a bunch of the other teams get upset, then Georgia could potentially sneak in and we get two SEC teams again. Beyond them, there's Missouri and Penn State, but they both have 2 losses already. So I think they're pretty much out of it. So it's really, the current top 8, some combination of them are going to be who's the top 4 teams.
Right. It's going to be interesting.
All right. Well, this has been a long one, but we covered a lot of topics today. It's sad that, feels like the college football season just started and now we're already here in December. And this is, I was kind of feeling a bit, melancholy after watching all these games and seeing how close they all were, right? Because some of these classic rivalries aren't going to happen anymore, right? With the new lineups, exactly. Right? Like Oregon State, Washington State, now that they're going to the Big Ten and things like that, and this is our last year of the 14 playoff, right? Before we enter the new era. So, it's kind of like enjoy it while it lasts. This is our last time kind of experiencing a lot of these things.
That's true. That's absolutely true. A lot of college traditions and hell, the disappearance of a 100-plus-year-old conference in the Pac-12. I mean, supposedly they're going to keep the name Pac-12 and they're going to reconstitute the Pac-12 with a bunch of other schools at some point. That's the plan that Oregon State and Washington State have. And they're going to try their best to hold on to as much of that $400 million that they get paid every year as they can, as they're able to legally secure. So it'll be very interesting to see, how that all plays out.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you all enjoyed listening to this podcast, you can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us if you search for College Football Throwdown on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave us a rating or review there. We always love hearing from the fans. So thank you all for listening, and thank you, Dad, for joining me for this episode. And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.